Welcome to Relationships 411 CST 110 team. In today's edition, we will talk about the stages of development and deterioration. What does that all mean? Well, I want you to think of the following. Think of a relationship you have with a friend or a significant other. How did it start? When did you know you were officially friends or partners? Each relationship has a starting point and in some cases an ending point. So today's recorded lecture will focus on how our relationships develop and the stages that take place when we break up. First, let's examine the type of relationships that exist in our lives. We start off with acquaintances, and acquaintances are people that we know by name. However, these interactions are largely impersonal. In other words, you might meet a classmate for the first time in CST 110 and you learn his or her name. And then when you see him or her in the hallway, you go ahead and engage in what we call chit chat. You say, "Hey, how are you? How's everything going?" And that's it. That's as far as it goes, largely impersonal. So we have a lot of acquaintances in our lives. Again, these are individuals that we just know by name and we might have a very small conversation. But you'll note there's not a lot of self-disclosure going on. So once you start engaging in friendship or intimate relationships, this is where there will be more self-disclosure. Let's distinguish between friendship and intimate relationships. Friendships take place with people with whom we have voluntarily negotiated more personal relationships. And you have various types of friendships. You may have work friends, you may have school friends, you may even have friends that you share a common interest. If you love playing softball, then you may have softball friends as well. So again, the distinction between acquaintances and friendship is, whereas with acquaintances, these are impersonal relationships. With friendships, again, you have voluntarily negotiated this type of relationship, bonding has occurred, and there's going to be a higher level of self-disclosure. Now with intimate relationships, these are going to take place with people with whom we share a higher degree of interdependence. There's more commitment, more disclosure as well, so you're going to be revealing more information about one another, and there's a level of understanding, affection, and trust. The two different types of intimate relationships are platonic and romantic. The platonic relationship takes place when partners are not sexually attracted to each other or they do not act upon any form of attraction they may feel. So if one of the partners feels attracted to the other person, they don't take any form of action because they want to maintain that relationship. On the other hand, romantic relationships take place when partners are openly acknowledging and possibly acting on a level of sexual attraction. So now that you know the different types of relationships that exist, I want you to look at the following. When we disclose, we reveal confidential information to someone. So the process of self-disclosure is when you are opening up about yourself. You're telling someone else about your thoughts and feelings. And this is why I like to compare self-disclosure to a head of lettuce. We are all a head of lettuce. In other words, we have multiple layers to ourselves. On the outer layers of this lettuce, we have what we call breadth. B-R-E-A-D-T-H. In other words, this is the range of subjects that you will discuss with your partner. When you first meet someone, for example, you may talk about where are you from, how old you are, what is your major, where you work, etc. So these are safe topics that you feel comfortable disclosing with just about anyone. On the other hand, once you start getting to know someone, you start engaging in the depth layer of self-disclosure, and that's D-E-P-T-H, depth. This becomes the quality of information that is shared, so it can go from safe to risky self-disclosure. So think of it this way. When you are engaging with an acquaintance, you might talk about the outer breadth of self-disclosure. Basic topics like your favorite color, your favorite food. Once you start becoming comfortable, one party exchanges information and then the other party feels comfortable exchanging an equal amount of information, then you might peel the layers and engage in depth. You might share maybe your professional goals. When you are in a friendship type of relationship, you may share a problem that is taking place in your life. Maybe you have difficulties at home. So you'll go ahead and open up and share this to your friend. When you meet a partner and you start talking about one another's goals, you may talk about the idea of possibly being committed to one another, whether it is becoming married or getting engaged or moving in together. So that is what we talk about with the depth layer of self-disclosure. Furthermore, self-disclosure is going to relate to the Johari window, which is going to discuss the different layers of self-disclosure that also take place with ourselves and with other people. We'll go ahead and discuss that in our next class meeting. But for now, remember, you are all a head of lettuce. You have multiple layers, and it's not until you feel comfortable sharing information that you'll start peeling those layers open to you. So what happens when we fall in love then, or when we make friends? Well, there are 5 unique stages of relational development. And please note, some of us may experience the stages in completely different order. So we don't always start with initiating and end with bonding. Let's go ahead and examine each stage. In the initiating stage, first impressions are made. In other words, we may rely on physical attraction because that's the very first thing that we see. And people want to go ahead and portray themselves as responsive. In other words, they want to demonstrate that they are interested in learning more about you. In this stage, it is very easy to talk to because, again, we are using more of the breadth layer of self-disclosure. So we talk about the safe topics, the where are you from? What is your name? What is your major? So in that initiating stage, again, this is that opportunity for you to create that first impression. Now, once you've decided, we have a couple of similarities in common, then you may engage in the experimenting stage. And this is when 2 people try to find similarities and more breadth and open pane of relationship takes place. In other words, you might start probing for information, and this is again what we call the acquaintance stage. This is when you're trying to learn more information about one another. There is more breadth of self-disclosure taking place, and again, this is very common for an acquaintance. You see someone in the hallway, you ask how their day is going, how was their weekend, and that's it. Now please note, most of our relationships will end in the experimenting stage. Once we start moving into the intensifying, this is where that depth layer of self-disclosure happens. This is where you start testing the potential for a relationship. Maybe you think this might be a potential friend or a potential partner. So you're going to go ahead and open up and start revealing more personal details, more of that risky self-disclosure to determine, can I trust this person with my personal information? Now, if that trust continues to develop, remember both parties need to exchange in self-disclosure for this relationship to work. If one party is self-disclosing and the other party refuses to open up, then we might end at the experimenting or intensifying stage. However, if both parties engage in self-disclosure and build that trust, then we might go ahead and transition to the integration stage, which is when 2 people begin to merge their social circles. They may even begin to merge their language, so they might have their unique language or idioms that they go ahead and share with one another. They may even have a unique greeting, so think about those handshakes that you have with your friends or a special hug that you have with a friend. In extreme cases, some people might start to dress up like one another. You might wear the same matching clothing, and you may even go ahead and introduce these people to your families and your friends as well. So this is where you determine, can you get along with my family and friends? That's why it's called integrating. Now, once you see everything is working well, then you go ahead and commit. And this is what is called bonding. Commitment to the relationship is communicated to the world through your language, through the labels that you have for one another. So you might call someone your best friend or your bestie. You, in the intimate relationships, you might call someone your boo or my significant other. You may even take it further with commitment and possibly propose to the individual. So you go ahead and transition to fiance or marriage. Finally, with the bonding stage, you may even exchange symbols like rings or friendship bracelets to demonstrate we are committed to one another. Now remember, not all relationships are bound to last. So in some cases, relationships have to end. What happens in this situation? Well, in relational deterioration, you also have 5 unique steps. In other words, you may go ahead and start off with differentiating, which is when you go ahead and exploit the differences that you have with someone. You let the person know what we don't have in common anymore and let them know I'm no longer focused on working together with you. There is a more desire for autonomy, so you may want to separate from the individual and have your own time. That temporary separation may occur. You may also engage in circumscribing, which is when you set limits and boundaries on communication. So in step 2, this is where you start minimizing that self-disclosure with the individual. And instead of talking about the depth or the risky self-disclosure topics, you may go ahead and start settling more for breadth and just letting them know how your day went, and that's it. And the reason you start disclosing less of the risky topics is because you start losing that trust in the individual and you fear that may lead to conflict. In the 3rd stage, which is stagnating, this is when you continue to limit your communication. Again, in each stage, you'll notice less and less communication, less frequency of seeing the individual, and you really feel like nothing is changing at this stage. It's not getting any better and it's not getting any worse. It's just hanging right there. So in this case, you decide, am I going to keep working for it? Am I going to try to maintain this relationship, or is it time to avoid and terminate? Now, the difference with avoidance and termination is with avoidance, you really don't have any contact with the individual. You don't even want to be in the same room as this person, but you don't verbally acknowledge that it's over. And sometimes in some relationships, we hang out in this avoidance stage because we don't necessarily want to indicate to the person that it's over. Remember, it's not until you reach the terminating stage where you say, this relationship is over. We're breaking up. This is where the relationship completely stops. And sometimes, remember, it's healthy for a relationship to change, especially if there's too much conflict taking place and you just don't see eye to eye with the individual. Now remember, there are 5 stages for both deterioration and for development. In some cases, a person may start with initiating and they may go ahead and marry the person 24 hours later. So they would jump from initiating to bonding. However, in order for a relationship to work, they will have to move backwards and self-disclose, get to know one another, build that trust, and integrate their social circles to make the relationship work. So just because a person meets and then marries with that same person maybe within a week, that doesn't necessarily mean that the relationship will end very soon, but it will take some work to make sure that the relationship develops effectively. Same thing with breakups. Sometimes people may say, you know what, I just don't feel like this is the right relationship for me, and then 24 hours later they terminate. This is where there might be some chaos in the relationship, a lot of conflict, because we didn't take the time to go through these stages. So by going through these stages, both for development and deterioration, you'll have a smoother relationship or a smoother breakup. Now that we have covered the different stages of relational development and deterioration, I want you to focus on understanding dialectical tensions and how to manage conflict for the next class. And I want you to provide examples of how to maintain your relationships. Finally, we will talk about who are you? In other words, what is your love style? How do you communicate in relationships? To help you wrap up today's lecture, remember to complete journal number 3. Enter the keyword from our lecture, which is self-disclosure, listed at the bottom, and complete the conflict management style questionnaire for this week's hybrid activity. Remember to enter your results in submission to journal number 3. See you soon, class!